Aldın kırıbı kallanacak tahta murimbo yalı Tahta okini aşka okini daha çok sonda yeri Tahtarını tahtana nyam yarangı nyam yana Son bima fırgılı yasmaktan toplulu
Boom. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, hello, hello. Hi, this is, my name's Richard.
And my name's Jacek.
And up in the corner there we have our guest Peter. This is the first recording of an interview for our UK thumb shooting group. Okay, hopefully first of many. But let's get started. We'd like to introduce Peter Dekker, renowned expert on all things Manchu Archer, historian and researcher. Right, Peter.
Welcome, Peter.
Okay. I think, shall I ask the first question then, just to get us going? Do you
Sure.
want to tell us a little bit about what got you started on Manchu Archery and how you got into it in the first place?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I grew up with bad 80s Kung Fu movies and American Ninja, things like that. So as a boy, I got really into swords. And as you can see behind me, that never stopped. And at some point, I was training Kung Fu because I wanted to learn how to fly like in the movies. And I never did. But there I got interested in Chinese swords. And at some point, I went to study in China. And when I had a real sword in my hands, a real antique, I was like, oh wow, this is very different from what they train with in Kung Fu. So I got really interested in the actual history of these swords. So I started to research who would carry them and how they would use them. And then I saw everybody with a sword also carry a bow. And whenever I read a text about it, they said the bow is first and the sword is just a secondary thing, just a little bit like a bayonet today is secondary to a gun. So then I got interested in the bow, like what's so great about this bow that it has such high standing in this culture. And then I noticed that nobody was actually into Chinese bows, and I even read online that some people said they were inefficient and they were bad bows, and that didn't really fit with what I knew about the Qing dynasty because they were usually successful military. So that got me thinking there must be something to this bow that is not widely known. So that really got me into studying it and finding out why they kept this bow in use, even though it was supposedly not a very good bow.
Right. So you said, when were you studying in China?
The first time I went to China was 2005. And then 2006 and 2007, I spent half a year there, half a year here each year.
So as a foreigner in China, did you find that it was easy to get information, especially asking questions about, all things related to royalty, I guess, and the Qing dynasty, all the stuff that's in the past? Was it easy for you to get information?
Relatively easy. I already had a network of Chinese collectors that I was emailing with back and forth before I went to China. And they were very accommodating. And then we visited Yang Fuxi also in 2005. He's the last of a line of bowyers in Beijing. And he was also very generous with what he knew. But when I look back over the last 15 years that I seriously researched the subject, I found the most useful information in old text. Because from then to now, a lot of oral transmission turned out to be either wrong or misinterpreted. So I really like to revisit primary text. So therefore I don't really need people in living traditions because they use different words, different names, substitutes for products. And it's very far from what happened in the Qing.
Cool.
Right.
Mm.
So what makes Manchu Archery then? What are the unique things about Manchu Archery that makes it distinct?
Yeah, I would say the arrow. I will get one.
There's a lot of arrows.
That's a lot of arrows. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. This is my arrow rack. I also have some on the wall downstairs. So this is a fairly standard arrow for a composite bow. This is happens to be Indian, but it's about the same size as used in most of the Islamic world. Turkish Ottoman arrows are a little bit shorter even. And then this is the Manchu arrow. It's about a third longer. These are usually 105 centimeters long. It was a standard size. And the thing is, the Manchus, when you look at their early history, they were Jurchen tribes, various tribes living in the area, and what they had in common was a language. And they had various lifestyles, but one of the most notable things is that they all lived from the wild, one way or another. So they didn't do any agriculture. So the bow was a big part of their livelihood. And when they would present presents to the emperor at around 2,000 years ago, they would present large mulberry longbows with really large arrows. So they had this tradition of large game hunting with humongous arrows. Then we don't know when the composite bow, the Asian composite bow, reached the area, but the Asian composites were usually relatively short bows built for speed. And I think they were like, well, we like the technology, but we need to shoot these big things.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they started to make these ears so long. First to increase the draw length, but also these work as levers to help bend this. So they're the most powerful bow in the sense that they produce the most kinetic energy in the arrows.
So to summarize, you reckon the Manchurian people used to use long bows with big arrows, and they wanted to carry on that, which just helped them hunting, I guess, big animals.
Yeah.
And with access to Asiatic composite bows, they're trying to build a bigger Asiatic bows to suit them.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's no hard evidence for this, but what we do know is the thing that stayed consistent was the arrow. And when you look at really old arrowheads, they're almost identical to the Qing military head, only they were made of bone. So this shape of head even has a maybe 2,000-year-old history as well in the area. So it seems they're really stuck with these arrows. Like whatever we use as a bow, it needs to shoot this.
Was that anything to do with their military tactics and the sort of artillery style of using the archers?
Yeah, I think everything they did came from their hunting, because hunting was their daily livelihood. And there was this saying that they kill before they eat. And it says a lot that first you go out to shoot something from horseback, and then you prepare your food. So when you get in a war with people who are conscripts, who live in a city and are forced to train a couple of hours per week to become soldiers, and you meet somebody who every day has to kill something to eat, then this person has a big advantage. So that's why I think everything they knew about archery came from the hunt. So what they would do is they would encircle the game in a big ring, and then close the ring and shoot it. But they would also always shoot it from horseback. They wouldn't lure an animal in. And this was twofold. One, it was very efficient to just get a lot of animals. In one day, for example, a traveling army could shoot 1,000 hares like that. So you'd have enough food when you're on the move. Another is that if there's an army inside that has guns, they need to spread fire to all directions, which makes it harder for them to hit you. So they continued this practice even though they had other means of food in the later period, because it was good training for war. But everything they did in war seemed to have had origins in the way they hunted. So I think they just happened to find out it also worked in war, instead of they designed these tactics for war.
So does Manchu bow has his peak when he reached his, like, let's say, when he stopped developing anymore, like let's say end of Qing dynasty, or was that put an end to progress of the bow itself?
It's very hard to say, because this bow entered the stage in the mid 17th century, maybe the early 17th century even, but only They only came into the spotlight when the Manchus were invading China. So we don't know how long it existed before that time. And they didn't change much until the 19th century, but we do know that the 17th and 18th century bows were just better made. And in the 19th century, the quality gradually become a little bit less, while the decoration becomes more flamboyant. So they look more fancy, but actually they're less good.
There were any unified measures for the army to have, or would you find that the nobles and the generals had different designs, or were they standardized?
Yeah, there were regulations for everything. And this mostly went into materials used, colors, and types of decoration. So, for example, the mid-18th century, you would see rayskin used on the tips of only some high-end officers, imperial guards. And by the 19th century, everybody had rayskin because trade made it more accessible. So you do see that there's differences in layers, who could have what, according to different periods.
I suppose we ought to mention the sort of poundage these bows were to chuck out those great big arrows as well.
Yeah, the Manchus thought that a grown man should be able to at least pull 80 pounds. And when you see the military reports, the average would be roughly from 70 pounds to 130 pounds average. And some of the best archers shot up to 270. So
270?
Yeah, that's the highest recorded weight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
well, you've got a little way to go, mates. Now.
Yeah. And every soldier had to, if you had to do an exam, the imperial exams, you had to be able to pull 160. So that was the baseline in pulling.
Right.
And
So we're talking about dry pulling.
Yeah, only drawing. And it's regarded good practice in China to shoot half of what you can pull.
Yes.
So if you can pull 160 and you use 80 in the field, you're quite comfortable with that.
And do you reckon that's the same numerology we can use today, or?
Yeah, I guess it'll make it good. I don't think it's necessary, but yeah.
Let's say if somebody can pull a 200-pound bow, would you expect to turn up into competition target shooting with a 100-pound bow?
No, not really necessary, I guess. But I think it's good to be able to pull at least twice of what you use, because then at least you have control.
Be more comfortable doing it if you needed that 100-pound bow, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And have you met any archers in China that were capable of pulling 200 pounds Manchu bows? Or have you seen any 200-pound Manchu bow?
No, the practice completely died out. So everything going on in China now is revival. Actually, it's a third wave revival, because after the Qing it died out. Then there was a nationalist revival in the 30s. Then it was pressed down under communist rule. And then came the recent revival because of the work of Stephen Selby mainly. So there have been many ways of reviving Chinese archery. And some of these guys now are actually at 200 pounds. I saw some people with pictures.
Right.
One guy in Hangzhou was pulling just over.
It's come on extremely quickly in the last few years, hasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's great actually that can be associated with China, because when people think about the famous term horse bows, when you ask an average person who doesn't have to do much with archery, he either thinks of Ottomans or Mongols. These are two kind of things that either in Hollywood famous for horse archery. When you ask someone about a Chinese bow, or it is so many. It's such a broad circle that the Manchu actually stands out of that. In the way there's design, the way the size of it, first of all, the size of it.
Yeah.
It stands out, and I think that has attracting a lot of people now these days. That the Manchu draw, and I think it feels like it's more exotic in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite different from all the other bows I've tried. It's if you pull it, there's this feeling like, hey, this is different. It doesn't go up as quick as you think it should, like when you pull it. because the curve is very flat.
And then it has that distinctive let off on the end as well.
Yeah.
So the initial draw will be very hard to start bending.
Yeah. Yeah, when I first got my fairly heavy one, I noticed that here an 80 pound is already 60, and here it only gains about 20 pounds. So that was quite something to have to pull up to this wall. But once you're moving, then
Right. So of course that probably needs different muscles to start to work rather than shooting a ball that is quite hard at the end.
yeah. Yeah, I wonder what these guys did that pulled 240 pounds.
The initial pull.
Yeah, how to get over that hump.
Maybe he needed a hand from someone to get it going.
Yeah, maybe.
Tell us about when you met Cuckoo, the last of the trained Manchu archers, yeah?
Yeah, that was quite something. I was...
Yeah. For the people who don't know, we're going to put the link underneath so they can read the article.
Yeah, I was at an archery festival and I was dressed like a Manchu with my bow and everything. And then this Malaysian fellow comes up to me, Sheikh Fuad is his name. And he said, hey, I have a chiropractor in Singapore and I saw in her office a photo of her dressed the same way you're dressed. And I talked to her about archery and she won a competition in the 1950s. So it became my life goal to meet her. And turns out she's part of the Manchu royal family. And her father was actually imperial guard for Puyi, the last emperor. And these imperial guards on one side needed to be able to damage other people in martial arts, but also be able to revive the emperor. So they always had some sort of medical knowledge because they lived close to him and should be on the ready. And he was a bone setter. For the most part, but also trained in wrestling, empty hand martial arts, and archery on horseback and on foot. But he saw China changing fast, and with the fall of the Qing, it became quite dangerous to be a Manchu. So he toned it down a little bit. So what he taught her was only what he thought was useful. So she didn't get a lot of the sword fighting arts or the horseback archery, but he did train her in traditional wrestling and normal traditional archery, and she became a champion in both. So that was quite cool. And at first I came there and I showed her a little bit how I pulled the bow, and she was very apprehensive. Like, first of all, why is a foreigner interested in our family art? And second, who teaches you? Because it doesn't look good. And then she was moving some parts and she's like, so who's your teacher? Who's teaching this? Because she thought I was being fooled by someone. So I had this folder with all these old photos of Manchu archers and some texts. And she went through them. So who gave you this? Like, yeah, I looked them up. And this is all you have? Yeah. Oh, then it's okay. Then it's actually pretty good how far you've come. And then she just said, oh, the hand is a little bit different. And especially the draw hands, the little detail of the twisting in and the twisting out. And yeah, she left like, this is quite something that a foreigner is interested in it and is so passionate that he's looking up all these pictures. And so she left with a smile, but in the beginning it was really as if I was some sort of intruder into some family secret that shouldn't be mine.
Cool. So how old was she when you met her?
I think she was in her late 80s, early 90s. Pretty old. Yeah. But she was still a very proud woman, standing straight upright, and when she grabbed you, you could feel that she was quite strong. Yeah, you could. Yeah, you could.
Be a hell of experience, really.
Yeah.
I'm guessing when she was helping you adjust your form, when she was grabbing you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So the one thing about the kit we haven't mentioned yet is that thumb ring, that very peculiar cylindrical thumb ring.
Yeah.
Is that very unique to Manchus?
It doesn't seem unique. So there's this text Arab archery who also speaks of a tribe that uses a cylindrical ring. And the advantage was that you don't have to align it before use. So it was used here and there, but in the later period, because that text is, I think, 15th to 16th century. When you're talking about 17th to 19th century, the Manchus are the only ones I know that would use it.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you discovered that the ring, was it together at the very beginning of it, or did it come later on that is actually part of a...
Yeah, fairly quick, because Stephen Selby paved the way a lot for people like me and also Justin. So I was religiously reading his aton.org and aton.net, all the posts and all the articles he wrote, and his book, of course. So I already knew that this was typical for the Qing dynasty. The mistake I made was that in the beginning I used it as a normal thumb ring, just like this, and then letting go like
So
that.
your finger wrapped right the way around.
So wrapping around the string.
Yeah. And yeah, it took Cuckoo
Which
to...
I probably guess it make even more harder to release because of the size.
Yeah.
With Manchu.
Yeah, and you really want a long bow, because if you have a Korean bow, the string angle is
Very
quite sharp.
acute, yeah.
Yes.
And it tends to hold on to the ring more, so it more has a tendency to want to pull your ring off. It is possible, but it's not ideal.
The other thing we see with people with thumb rings a lot is them wearing them below their knuckle, the same as they would do with a say a Turkish ring.
Yes.
Yeah.
Instead of and I think you were someone who actually drew out that little picture on your website of how to wear it right over the knuckle, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we have a close up, or yes? So right over the... Perfect. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So at first I would also put it all the way down.
Right.
But then it helps from sliding up, because you can really clamp it. But you get all kinds of bruises in your thumb, because it actually cuts off the blood supply. And when you put it a little bit forward, you can still clamp it.
Yeah.
And yeah, instead of doing this and holding everything with your index finger, you actually twist it. And then you don't really need the index finger anymore, even. With higher poundage bows I would, but here I can just pull it just by keeping the string behind the ring in this twisting motion.
Just touching the end of your finger, or not bothering?
Yeah, to show I'm not touching, I now do this, but usually you touch it lightly. Yeah.
Will the middle finger be touching the ring?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
And then you're twisting in anti-clockwise, yeah?
Yeah, I'm a lefty,
Other
so
way.
for me clockwise, but for the normal archers, it's counterclockwise. Yeah, yeah. And it helps to have a relatively thick string. This is even thin for Manchu standards. If you see an old knock,
Yes.
these were thick strings.
And that's built up, but they served the whole string, as I remember.
Serving on a whole string.
Yeah, yeah. Let me see if I have an old string here. It's really thick. It's usually about 5 or 6 millimeters.
We can have a close look at Peter's collection now.
Yeah. Yeah, now he's out the way.
Yeah.
Well, Peter is...
On an unlikely source, this is actually an old bow that is still strung.
right.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is quite something.
This is my replica. So yeah, some of the old strings are really, really thick.
Cool.
And would you know the Manchu archers were skilled with using bow on both sides, where the horse archers, I'm guessing, the left and right hand, or this examination only happened with dominant hand?
Yeah, the examination was only with the dominant hand, but a lot of emperors were stressing that people should train both sides of the body, and a lot of people that were hailed as good archers were known to be able to use both sides. but it was something that was slowly starting to fade. So that's why there was so much talk about it. Like, hey, in the old days we could all do this, and why are we only focusing on one side? And this especially became a thing in the 18th century, when after decades of peace, a lot of these Manchu warriors only heard about war from their fathers or grandfathers. So they were more interested in Beijing operas, gambling, drinking, than they were in archery, and you see a gradual decline of their skills.
Yeah, I've found the same thing myself.
Yeah.
Lack of war.
Yeah. Ever since the wars are over, I'm also drinking more. Yeah.
So yes, okay.
So the basic stance for drawing the Manchu bow,
Mhm.
apart from the extremely long draw, which has its own problems,
Mhm.
is not dissimilar to drawing any other heavy bow, is it? It's
Yeah.
if you look at the pictures of the Manchu archers and some of the guys pulling modern English longbows, they look very similar when they're stood at full draw.
Yeah, I think the only real difference is in the hands, the bow grip and the string grip, but the basic posture is identical to any heavy archery culture, I think. Even when you look at
adjustment of the wrist probably allows to draw longer rather than being limited to this position.
Yeah,
So,
this type of ring places the string here. A normal ring should place the string about here, and the fingers place it here. So you gain maybe 2 inches.
an inch probably.
Yeah, only with the draw alone, so that helps. And also the bow hand. So normally an archer would grip the bow like this, and the Manchu grip is like this. So it rests on the web.
Right.
And the idea is that if you have it like this, there's a little bit interaction with the bow, and that means you can get these out of alignment, and these are helping you to pull this limb, but they just as well help you pulling the limb out of alignment. So if you pull like this and you apply a little bit sideways pressure, your arrow will veer off a lot, or even worse, your bow can become unstrung. So by pulling it like this, you actually make sure that your hand cannot apply any sideways pressure. And I think that is the main reason, but an added reason is that it also pushes the bow about 1 inch more to the front.
So the bow hand stays steady upon release.
Yeah, at least in all the text I see it's steady, and also when you see Manchu archers right after the shot, the bow is still like this. It's never turned like that.
Yeah.
But
what
there
about
is a video, actually, Mongol 1950s with Manchu bows where they do spin. But this is target archery, and it might just be like a fancy trend at the time. It doesn't have to mean anything.
The Mongols.
Yeah, but they were using still Manchu equipment, Manchu military equipment.
Yes, and is that the technique when they put arrow on the other side, actually?
In this video, they're still using an older Qing method.
Right.
So yeah, using the arrow on the other side actually started, I think, in the 90s when some Frenchman, he shot like that, and he won, and then everybody started to shoot like that, hoping that they could win. But it's a fairly recent development.
Right, it's just very recent on the pictures showing using the arrow on the right-handed shooter left side of the bow, which is very, very weird in a way.
Yeah, if your release is clean, you can make it work, but for a lot of things like being on the horse, it's just not ideal at all.
Yes, it's mostly for long-distance shooting when they're very stable.
Yeah.
Yes.
And another thing that is specific to Manchu is that, let me get an arrow. So this is an old arrow, old hunting head. And what you see here is that the distance is relatively far when you compare it to almost any other arrow. This happens to be.
Do you mean the distance from the feathers to the nock?
Yeah. So this
is
This
Ottoman is very close.
Yeah. So this is typical Ottoman Fletching. And the reason for this is interesting. It works as a lever because you have the feathers and they exceed the brace height of the bow. So to pull them, they would put the finger here and have to
Pre-draw.
yeah,
Right.
and then put them on. I'm not going to pull it all the way because
I kind of worked that one out instinctively as well. Because first time I pulled the long fletching, I was like, whoa, that's coming across my handle.
yeah. And you see this only on expensive arrows, hunting arrows and target arrows, because for those arrows it was actually desirable to keep these long expensive fletchings in one piece. But the further it's back, the more it stabilizes. So on military arrows, you see that the fletching is all the way back, because then they don't care if it's ruffled a little bit, because it's a one-shot thing anyway. So that's also an interesting thing to note.
So will the bow be very, I guess it would be very valuable thing back in the day.
Yeah, they were quite...
So would it be passed over from the father to son, or would it stay within the military, let's say, unit or group, or would it be something that gets inherited?
Yeah, it was quite common actually for a younger soldier to buy from one of the older family members, or inherited. Yeah, that happened. And these bows are wonderful in that they're all made with fish bladder glue. You can steam them apart, and every part can be taken off and replaced.
Wow.
Stephen Selby actually had a bow with a part that had Ming Dynasty markings, while the rest of the bow was Qing.
Right.
So it goes to show that some parts just were in use for a long period of time. And I think Ottoman sources said that a composite bow should live about 2 generations. So 1 generation maybe being, I don't know, 60 years or something.
Yes, 2 generations. Yeah. So if you would have put a price in the modern times, how much you reckon a bow like this would be worth back in the Qing Dynasty time for the common person to buy?
Yeah, I once did a conversion, and
yes.
These conversions are very difficult, of course, because I converted the price in silver and calculated the price of silver at the time and then what you could buy for it in Europe. But I came to around 2,500–3,000 euros for a Manchu bow in the Qing Dynasty. So pretty much similar to what good bowyers are asking today. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to pause us there for a second, so we'll be back in a moment.
Алтын бірібі талыды жақ, ақта мұримбы ялу, ақта окені, ашта окені, да көк сонды елі,